every year in San Francisco, I look around and I see organizations that have sprung up that are meeting the needs of the community. And certainly, one that's been in the forefront a lot lately and just celebrating a very important anniversary is BAYS, Bay Area Youth Summit. And we're here with its executive director tonight, Jason Galisatus. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me again.
You seem too young to be an executive director of anything. I mean, come on.
Well, that's the whole point. I mean, we really want to focus on...
Thank you. You led me right into it. There you go.
Well, I mean, we really want to focus on having something that is driven by youth. We think that youth possess the knowledge of how to best go about solving the problems that we are faced with. So our theory is to really listen and gain the input from the people who we're trying to impact. And we're hoping to get some great answers and come up with some creative, different solutions that maybe the LGBT community hasn't thought of yet.
Right. So talk to me a little bit about how it got founded and what your mission is.
Sure. So back in 2010, I was the president of my school's Gay Straight Alliance Club. And there was really no way for us to coordinate with the other GSAs. We weren't in contact with them. We didn't know who they were. So finally, we pulled everybody together through doing some digging, and we really just wanted to have a place where youth could come together in a space that is not only social, but one that is conducive towards developing leadership and providing education.
Right. So now, you were the head of the Gay Straight Alliance in your school.
That's
what
correct.
school was that? Can you
Aragon
say?
High School in San Mateo.
And what was that like, being young, gifted, and gay in San Mateo?
You know, San Mateo is a little bit more conservative than the rest of the Bay, I would say. It was a little bit tricky trying to get through some of the roadblocks. There were initially some people who resisted the idea of having a Gay Straight Alliance, but after gaining a lot of visibility, especially with regards to the Proposition 8 fiasco, we were able to garner a lot of support on campus.
Now, you came out when you were how old?
14.
Right. You know, this is of great interest to, I think, men and women, my generation. I knew I was gay from the time I had a Raggedy Ann doll back when I was like 4. But boy, during high school, I was just trying to keep my head down.
Right.
We really live in a different world.
We do.
But now, did you come up against homophobia and bullying and that sort of thing at San Mateo at Aragon High?
I did. I would say that some of the biggest pushbacks I received was through doing activism itself. You know, it does put you on the spot, and you are a visible, I guess, representative, or people perceive you as a representative of the community. So, especially during times like Prop 8, when things are especially controversial, you are sort of thrust into the forefront of that debate.
Were you ever threatened?
I was threatened. I received a few death threats. I did become physically threatened at a couple points. But luckily, I had a great supportive network. The school itself was very supportive. And with that help, I was able to pull through it. Now,
you have an interesting family background. You know, your dad's Greek-American, your mother's Chinese-American. I mean, two very different immigrant experiences.
Certainly.
Were your parents embracing of your sexual orientation when you announced it?
Initially, it was, I think the biggest thing they were worried about was safety, and about whether or not my potential to succeed in life would be hindered greatly by me coming out. I think after time, they were able to see that my activism was something that was empowering instead of a detriment. And they are very supportive now. My dad even attended my very first gay pride back when I was, I think the summer of my sophomore year. He came with me, and that was a really big step for him, and they're perfectly fine now.
Now, the name of your organization, and you're the executive director, this is a paid position? This is your job now, or it's still volunteer?
It's still volunteer-based, unfortunately. I don't receive a salary.
So, you know, how do you support yourself?
Well, I'm currently a student, so I'm a full-time student. I'm a junior at Stanford studying political science.
No surprise.
Thanks. Well, you know, it's one of those things I do on the side, even though it is sort of like a full-time job in its own right. Luckily, my staff and the board is incredibly talented, and they help bear that burden of steering the organization.
Now, the organization Bay Area Youth Summit, it's a nonprofit, and it serves the LGBT youth community. How do you define youth?
Youth is defined for us as undergraduate age or younger, so essentially 22-year-olds down.
And I noticed that it is the Bay Area Youth Summit, not the Bay Area Lavender Youth Summit or the Bay Area LGBT Youth Summit or the Bay Area Gay Youth Summit.
Right.
Did you leave those out on purpose?
We wanted it to be as inclusive to everybody as possible. We wanted, we recognize that LGBT activism is not a realm solely limited to LGBT people, and we wanted to leave it open to allies who play a very key role in our community.
So do you have non-gay people that are involved in the Youth Summit?
We do. A number of our board members are straight allies.
Mm-hmm. So you get together once a month, you meet. What is it you actually do that is informing the conversation? Are you trying to pass legislation?
Sure.
Are you trying to make it safer for young people in schools and public?
Yeah, I would say that our number one objective is to first empower youth. So we try to support as many youth projects as possible, but in terms of the other steps we do, we have a number of programs. One, for example, is the Middle School Safety Initiative. Now, there's a really big hole in the LGBT community right now. Middle school students are not receiving the attention that they need. Their identities are considered transient for whatever reason, and they're not given enough of the resources that they need to develop healthily. So one of the things we're trying to do is establish some sort of a program within middle schools to educate not only administrators, but the students themselves.
And why, you call it a hole. Why is that? Is it just because, I mean, adolescence is so much going on anyway, it's like, please, I can't deal with this? Or is there some sort of curriculum problem within middle schools around LGBT issues?
You know, I think it's tricky. Middle schools are really tricky. They're heavily guarded. I think a lot of middle school administrators are hesitant to enact LGBT related things in their curriculum just because they're worried about parent pushback. So a lot of what we need to do is educate administrators and say, look, even though this work that we're doing is targeted towards LGBT people, the work that we're doing will make it ultimately a safer place for everybody.
All right, and define middle school for me. That's what I would have called 8th, 9th, 10th grade?
It's actually 6th, 7th, and 8th.
6th, 7th, and 8th
Yeah.
grade, okay. But correct me if I'm wrong, isn't it the law of the state of California that LGBT history is taught in all schools?
That's the Fair Education Act, and the big issue with this is that it's not being implemented. It's one thing to
But
have
it's the law.
Indeed it is, but a lot of administrators aren't aware of the law or, resist the law in many ways. The implementation part really comes down to the school districts. So we really need to make sure that our school districts are doing their due diligence and actually enacting this.
So even though Governor Brown signed the Fair Education Act, is that what it's called?
Yeah, there are no provisions to ensure the actual implementation of that.
So we have a law in the book that looks really good and made a lot of gay people feel like our history is being taught in the schools. But you know what? If you really don't want to enact it and you live in a conservative district, you don't have to teach it. Is that what you're telling me?
That's not the law. That is how it's being carried out currently.
You think that was on purpose?
No, I don't think it was on purpose. I think that
it makes politicians feel good to pass laws.
It does, but the issue with this is that the implementation aspect would have required additional legislation that maybe would have threatened the actual passage of that bill. And I think it was strategic, and I think that the fact that we have this law is a fantastic first step. But now it's up to the community to really make sure that this law is being carried out within the school districts.
So have you been to Sacramento to say, we have a law here, guys, it isn't really being...
Yeah, so right now what's being done, John O'Connor, the Executive Director of Equality California, is calling upon the Assembly to conduct an audit, essentially, of these schools, which is basically just that, figuring out why this isn't being implemented or what schools are and are not implementing it, and hopefully develop some suggestions of how implementation can successfully
Do you
occur.
think that the answer as to why it's not being implemented is as simple as the word homophobia?
I think it exactly is. I think it is homophobia or just plain ignorance.
I mean, I think at the federal level they call this a non-funded mandate.
Exactly. It's an unfunded mandate. I think that's a very accurate way of describing it, except on the state level, of course.
So you've got this whole of middle school, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. The time when, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, you know more about this than I do, but isn't that the age when we're seeing a lot of bullying and attempted teen suicides?
Yeah, so right now the average age of coming out is around 13. So what we're seeing is that students are coming out earlier and earlier, but of course the resources aren't necessarily keeping up with that new demand. And of course, bullying does happen because, frankly, I think a lot of people are insecure about their identities in middle school. I mean, I know I was. And so it creates all this insecurity, all this. It's a very transient time in which everything's changing. It's a ripe environment for bullying, and I think that's why it requires special attention.
So talk to me about a typical day for the Bay Area Youth Summit. How do you get to these school administrators? How do you get to teachers? But also, how do you get to students and say, maybe 6th, 7th, and 8th grade now isn't really the best,
Right.
We're here to tell you that it does get better, but maybe not for these 3 years. Is that the message?
Of course not. I mean, I think it can get better during those 3 years, and I think it hasn't because we haven't invested enough in it. What I would hope is that, with this additional support through the students and hopefully coming top down from the administrators, it would create an environment in which students would feel comfortable formulating their sexual identity in a safe manner.
Have you had any real, you say this kind of this whole, but have you had any real proactive, aggressive, don't bring the Bay Area Youth Summit to my school district?
We haven't experienced that too heavily. We've been, because the Middle School Safety Initiative is rather new, we've been starting with schools that are generally more receptive. When we take, if we were going to go into a school that we know is hostile, it would definitely take a more strategic approach in terms of how do we convince this, and that would change on a school-to-school basis.
So in our last few minutes, talk to me about a success story.
Of
Bay Area Youth Summit, something that has happened that that we have had an impact in a positive way.
Well, one thing we do every year is put on a big conference. That's where we got our namesake, the summit aspect. And this one happened in May of this past year, and it was a huge success. We had Dustin Lance Black speak, who wrote Milk, Zach Walls, who spoke at the Democratic National Convention, and it was all emceed by Raja, who's the winner of RuPaul's Drag Race Season 3. So it was a really wonderful time, and we had around 200 to 300 students come about. It changed at a certain, discrete periods in the day, but it was really wonderful. We got some incredible responses from the people who went. A lot of people saying it changed their life. But one of the things that was really exciting for me is that a parent of one of the students who went came to me and said, after going to the summit, she never went to school in the same way. She never looked at it the same way, and she saw her role as a leader. She saw her potential to be able to change the school climate and to change what's going on. I think that's the biggest impact that we could possibly ask for, is just letting students know that they have the power to make the difference and equipping them with the tools that they need to actually make that difference.
Right. What's on your wish list next for Bay Area Youth Summit?
Well, we're currently expanding geographically. We're starting some projects down in Los Angeles. So the wish list, hopefully, is to complete that successfully. Another one is that, unfortunately, I'm running out of time as executive director. This year will be my last year as executive director.
You're just getting too old.
I am, and I will no longer qualify as our, under our definition of youth.
That's sad, but you're a political science major, right?
Indeed, and I'm currently involved in the David Campos for Assembly campaign. That's been something I've been very passionate about. David actually spoke at Bay's 2011. He was one of the first speakers to ever speak at the summit, and he took a chance on us. A politician up in San Francisco, drove 30 minutes all the way down to San Mateo to speak to a bunch of youth who couldn't vote for him.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry you're getting too old, but I have a feeling we'll be hearing more about you on the campaign trail.
Hopefully.
Next up, our conversation with one of the people responsible for putting the nail in the coffin of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Our conversation with U.S. Navy veteran Joseph Roca. We'll be right back.